Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the National Archives Foundation's virtual program series. I'm Patrick Madden, the Executive Director of the National Archives Foundation, and we're happy to have you viewing from home today. Through this programming, we're kicking the doors of the National Archives open, even though the doors in Washington are still closed for now, and we want to share the treasures of the past with you. By now, I think our secret is out. You've been getting our American Experience emails on Tuesday, or maybe the History Snacks emails on Friday for our young history buffs. And I hope you've had a chance to see our website for all of the online and virtual programming that we're providing during this time at archivesfoundation.org. Today, I've got a delicious program and conversation for you with a fellow who knows a little bit about chocolate. If you're with us for one of our last programs, I'm dressed a little bit differently. There'll probably be a few less costume changes if you're with us on July 4th, but we're going to have a blast. Before we get started, I want to make sure you know we are going to be taking questions from you later in the program. So if you can use the chat box to the right of your screen, then you can put your questions in there either while we're talking at first or when we actually start the Q&A. Right now, if you want to practice, we'd love to know where you're watching from. So put your city and state in there, and I'll try and give your hometown a shout out when we get to that point. All right, let's get on to it. Today we have with us a chocolate historian, Dave Borghesani of Mars Wrigley. And I was gonna tell you a lot about his background, but I thought it might be easier to show you a little something that's better than that.
Happy Valentine's Day! No one ever said I love you with a box of Brussels sprouts, or even some sugar for that matter. Maybe some dates. I am constantly amazed by how little people know about the history of chocolate and its staggering impact on the history of the world. Most people only see it as a tasty little morsel, but behind its modest brown color, chocolate is a powerhouse of history, a discovery that spawned international trade. It provided hope for the sick, even if it didn't work exactly. Gave us a great gift idea for Mother's Day and a way to make any date a little sweeter. Together, we're going to explore what it would have been like if we had never discovered chocolate, if our ancient brothers and sisters had never fired up the first cocoa pod. That's right, people. Just think of a world that didn't know the taste of that magnificent elixir of the gods, that pop of joy when you've had a bad day, that simply sweet way to show you care. I'm pretty sure things would go haywire around here without chocolate's sweet influence on our daily lives. It's a haunting thought, but an intriguing one to explore. Up for an adventure? Because if you are, so am I. I'm Dave Borghesani, your chocolate historian.
So I was muted there. My apologies. A world without chocolate, absolutely not going to happen. That's just a terrible idea. So I've got my M&Ms here to get us through this program, and we've got a guy here who knows a little bit about putting back a candy bar or two, I'm sure. Dave has, I've had the opportunity to know Dave for the last 7 years. Dave is a chocolate historian research manager for Mars Wrigley. He's been there for 34 years and worked very closely on the American Heritage Chocolate team for the last 5 years, researching and telling the story of chocolate. If you don't know American Heritage Chocolate, you will by the end of today's program. It's based on the recipes from colonial America that allows people to taste and experience the chocolate as it was with our founding fathers. So with that, Dave, welcome. Are you with us?
I'm here, Patrick.
Good. Wonderful. That's terrific. Before we get started, just tell us how are you doing during these crazy times?
Well, thankfully, my family is well as all the coworkers that I'm familiar with. And I pray that you and the staff at National Archives And family and friends, wherever they may be, are also doing well too.
Terrific. Well, we got folks from all around the country. We'll get to that in a little bit. And actually, I saw a couple of international sites jump in as well. So we're going to have a lot of fun. Let's start at the beginning. Let's start with the basics. Going to jump right in. Where did chocolate come from and who discovered it?
Well, I'm glad to do that. And you know, it's always fun to be here with you at the National Archives, even if we're not actually together, which we will be, I pray, shortly too. But the beginning is a perfect place to start. And chocolate was first discovered about 3,500 years ago. It actually comes from the rainforest of modern day South and Central America. And chocolate is actually made from the beans of the fruit of the cocoa tree. Now, one of the things that's fascinating about the cocoa tree is it loves to grow in hot, humid climates between the latitudes of 20 degrees north and 20 degrees south of the equator, likes humidity, also likes a pretty constant temperature, about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And cocoa trees actually grow in what's called the understory of the jungle, where big tall trees grow over the cocoa trees, diffusing the light that actually comes into the jungle, so not damaging the leaves. Also traps that beautiful warm air that gets to the ground every day. Now, Patrick, I got a question for you. So if cocoa likes an environment like that, we don't commercially grow cocoa in any of the 48 contiguous United States. What's the one state where we actually do farm cocoa?
You're giving me a softball to start out. I'm going to go with Hawaii.
Good guess. Yes, indeed. We grow cocoa in Hawaii, but it's not a big contributor to the world's cocoa supply.
All right. So basically, all the chocolate we get comes from those trees in that specific area?
Yes, that's correct. It actually takes about 3 years for a cocoa tree to start producing cocoa pods, and about 6 or 7 years before it actually produces a good viable crop of pods. Each pod is about the size of a small football like you see here. And these pods, Patrick, whether you knew it or not, are actually classified as fruits. But unlike most fruits, the pods grow along the lower branches and the trunks of the tree, where it makes them actually easier to be harvested. Now, inside these pods, you might find about 30 to 50 cocoa beans in a mature pod.
Okay, but I mean, that's not what the chocolate we know today. How do we get there?
Yeah, it certainly is. As a matter of fact, if you bit into one of those cocoa beans, you'd have a unique chocolate experience. But the beans and the pulp are actually harvested from the cocoa trees. Cocoa farmers take those beans and pulp and put them right on the bamboo mats or in boxes on the jungle floor. Now, they let them go through a process called fermentation. And what happens is the sugars change in the beans. And again, we start to see a change in the color as well as the flavor of the beans themselves. Now, after the beans are fermented, they're placed on bamboo mats or in tables, also right there in the jungle, where they go through a process of drying. Now, one of the things that people who first started exporting cocoa beans discovered was if you don't get as much moisture out of the beans as you can, they can form mold when you take them on a voyage outside of the cocoa growing regions.
So how long does that process take?
Well, it actually, the big process takes about 2 weeks to get to that point, but then the beans are taken to the point where they're going to be roasted, Patrick. And while we've already discussed about the ways that chocolate changes, the cocoa changes color, as well as it starts to change the flavor, roasting is really where the flavor is created. Now, a skilled chocolate maker for thousands of years would have had to use their senses of sight and smell to know when those beans had reached their optimal flavor. Now, again, from all that time, making chocolate was more of an art than it was a science. And those skilled chocolate makers knew how to roast beans properly. After the beans were roasted, they might have been placed in a basket called a winnowing basket. Now, the basket might have been taken out into the garden like you see this woman doing right here. And then she gently tossed the beans in the basket. And as the beans landed in the basket, the little thin shell that surrounds the beans would break loose and the air, the wind would gently blow it into the ground where the shell would act like a mulch or a fertilizer, so nothing was wasted. And when those beans landed back into the winnowing basket, they would break apart into what we call cocoa nibs.
So are these the same cocoa nibs we see in stores today?
You bet they are. And you know, cocoa nibs have been enjoyed for a long, long time, and they're ideal for cooking, for baking. You can put them in different kinds of drinks like smoothie. You can put them in yogurt. They're very versatile. And one of the things that we know about the cocoa nibs is they're really the starting point for making chocolate. Now, chocolate makers would have taken those nibs and placed them on a heated stone called a metate, and then using another stone called a mano, ground them into a delicious cocoa paste. But chocolate makers learned early on that it was even better if they flavored the chocolate. So they would have actually flavored it with different spices right into the paste. And after they finished grinding it into the paste, they would have scooped the paste into little molds to form solid blocks, which was the saleable shape that would have gone out to the public.
So the first time I heard you talk about the history of chocolate, this really intrigued me, this idea of spices. So what kind of spices were added?
Yeah, so spices, first of all, that were available to the chocolate maker, of course, but spices that were indigenous to the area. So for example, if you were in the Mesoamerican region, which is modern day Central America or Mexico, you might have used spices like vanilla, chili, annatto. But once chocolate went to Europe, they would have added different spices that they had brought over from their spice trade in the Far East, things like cinnamon and nutmeg and anise. How about orange to flavor their chocolate?
Okay, so I think we kind of fast forwarded here. Like, who came up with this idea of taking it out of a pod from beans? How far back does that go? You made a reference earlier.
Yeah, so we really believe it went back about 3,500 years ago, and it actually gets its origin in what's called the Amazon basin between the modern day countries of Ecuador and Brazil. And from there, it spread up to Central America, Mexico, over to the Caribbean, landed in Africa, and finally into Southeast Asia. What we believe that the original people who actually discovered the cocoa pod did with it is they removed those cocoa beans and sucked on that sweet sugary pulp that surrounded the beans and maybe discarded the beans, or they even took that sweet sugary pulp, left it out in the sun, and fermented it into an alcoholic drink. Now, the first known people to actually use cocoa beans were the Olmec civilization, which dates back to about 1500 BC. We know that the Olmecs actually used cocoa. They didn't have a written language, so they couldn't write anything down for us, but they inscribed different images of cocoa trees, cocoa pods, as well as people drinking their chocolate, so we could learn from them. It then spread up to the Maya, the Toltecs, and finally the Aztecs. And each civilization added their own improvement on the farming, the cultivation, and the harvesting of the cocoa beans, because it was highly prized, it was highly sought after, and it was even used in religious ceremonies as part of rituals, and it was also believed to have medicinal properties. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later.
So we go, tell me though, it's obviously pretty focused in one relatively small region of the world. How do we go from one location and now this chocolate drink is making its way around?
Right, this is a great new world discovery. And when Christopher Columbus made his fourth voyage to the New World in 1502, he actually saw some Maya paddling a canoe that he mistook carrying a pile of almonds. That's what he thought they were, but they were actually cocoa beans. Now we know Columbus brought some of the cocoa beans back to Spain with him, but we don't really have much of a record that shows that anything came of them. However, in 1519, when Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortez arrived at the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, he met Aztec king Emperor Montezuma II. Now, Montezuma II mistook Cortez for the prophesied god Quetzalcoatl, and he regaled him, he welcomed him, he lavished him with many, many gifts, one of which was a frothy, delicious cup of spiced chocolate. Now, Cortez didn't love the drink at first. It was a very unusual flavor, but eventually he did learn to enjoy the drink. Now, here's some fun stories about Montezuma. It was believed that Montezuma drank about 50 cups of chocolate a day. And the palace servants drank about 200 pitchers of chocolate a day. And another fun story is that after Montezuma got done drinking his chocolate, he took his golden goblet and discarded it in the lake next to the palace. Now, to the best of our knowledge, no one's actually uncovered all of those golden goblets, but it makes for a fun story. And cocoa beans even became a form of a currency there. The great wealth of Montezuma II was actually based upon a cocoa currency.
Hang on. So I have kids. They have their own candy currency after trick-or-treating on Halloween that I have seen. Are we saying it's basically the same concept?
Well, it's not quite like chocolate dollars, but in the Aztec market, as you can see on the slide here, you could take those cocoa beans and convert them into goods. Like one cocoa bean could buy you a tomato, or 200 a turkey. You know, it's fun, Patrick, to think about it. You know that old expression that they say, money doesn't grow on trees? I don't think that's true. It did in this case.
Okay, so we've had a little bit of a time warp here. You've taken us back 3,500 years. So how do we continue to see chocolate spreading?
Well, when Cortez went back to Spain in 1528, he brought cocoa beans and chocolate and introduced it to the Spanish royal court, where King Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, was in place. And again, he needed to get used to the beverage. So that's where they started adding some of those spices I mentioned earlier, the nutmeg and the cinnamon, and started flavoring it the way they like it. Now, Spain kept chocolate a pretty well kept secret for about 75 years. It really wasn't until it started to spread a little bit because of a bunch of different people coming into Spain. But one of the fun stories is in 1615, Princess Anne of Austria, part of the Holy Roman Empire, was raised with chocolate. She had grown up drinking chocolate. And when she went to marry Louis XIII of France, she took chocolate with her and brought it into the French royal court. Now in France, much like in Spain, chocolate stayed with the nobility. It was expensive, it was very exclusive, and it stayed there for quite a while.
But where were they getting the beans? Obviously, it's expanding. My sense from what you said before, they didn't quite have the right climate in Europe.
They certainly didn't. They wouldn't have been able to grow them successfully there. But one of the things that Spain did was they started to use their colonies in the Caribbean as well as South America to farm lots of different goods, one of which was cocoa, which became a very profitable cash crop. And they started bringing the cocoa beans into Europe. But eventually, cocoa spread by other people, as I mentioned before, started with the Venetian merchant in about 1606. He came in, saw chocolate, brought it back to Venice, and then he also went to the Caribbean and started farming cocoa for the Italians at that time too. Eventually, it wound up in England in about 1650, and it was introduced first to King Charles I, but it did spread pretty quickly. And as you see on your screen, these places called chocolate shops or chocolate houses opened up. And when they opened up, it actually gave chocolate to a different class other than royalty called the gentry. And these were basically social clubs where people could go and have a delicious cup of coffee, tea, or chocolate.
Okay, so Europe is basking in the chocolate. How do we get it here in the American colonies?
Oh, yes. Well, the first known appearance probably happened by accident. In 1641, a Spanish ship leaving the Spanish colony of Puerto Rico, bound for Spain, made with bad weather, had to take port in St. Augustine, Florida. On board that ship were cocoa beans, chocolate, and the tools to make chocolate. They even had cups and china services for chocolate. And as a way to help compensate for the damage done on the ship and really the loss of the ship, they auctioned that all off to the citizens of St. Augustine, thereby actually starting what we believe to be the first chocolate colony. But through research efforts of Mars, we've uncovered that the first recorded sale and consumption of chocolate happened up in Boston in about 1670. Two women opened up a tavern where, again, they served warm drinks to their patrons. We do believe that the chocolate was probably imported from England. It would have been imported as a solid block of flavored chocolate. They would have grated it and most likely blended it with warm water. And then using a tool like this, Patrick, this is called a molinillo. They're still used today in the world. And if you don't have one, these are pretty cool. They come in different shapes and sizes. And literally, the chocolate makers would spin it like this and whip up a delicious frothy cup of chocolate. Now, milk might have been added if people had access to dairy, but other things were blended with chocolate. Things that you might not think about, like brandy or cognac or red wine, to make a delicious cup of chocolate.
Now you've got my attention. It's after 5. It's happy hour everywhere, or at least on the East Coast. So is this when we start producing our own chocolate and it starts to spread?
Yeah, it actually starts to spread up and down the East Coast as production takes over and trade routes are evolving. But one of the interesting things is it actually starts spreading up in the late 17th and early 18th centuries from New Mexico, which is modern day Spain, Mexico, sorry. And chocolate was carried by explorers, settlers, soldiers, and how about this? Missionaries. So as they ventured north, they carried these pressed cakes of chocolate. Anytime they wanted a drink, they could just grate it, blend it with some water, and have a very satisfying snack. It was something that was filling, something that gave them energy, but it was also something that could relax them after a long day of travel.
So we have the chocolate houses or the coffee houses today. I don't know, maybe we need to have chocolate houses come back. So it's starting to spread. Talk a little bit more about how it expands to the West.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, it came up from New Spain, but one of the fun stories that I think is important to kind of bring up, because it's neat that people documented their use of chocolate, and two people documented it really nicely for us, Lewis and Clark. So when Lewis and Clark were seeking passage through the Northwest over to the Pacific in 1804, 1806, they documented many times how they enjoyed chocolate. And one of the things William Clark, who kept his diary recorded, he said one time he felt himself very sick and very unwell, and he prepared a cup of chocolate for which he drank a pint and felt great relief. Come on, Patrick, who wouldn't feel great relief after drinking a pint of chocolate?
I'm on board. Maybe that's just me and my sweet tooth. So how was chocolate used during the war? Was it rationed?
Yep, it's one of the ways it was used. And one of the other things about chocolate, we know that chocolate was part of every modern American war that we have fought in since the French and Indian War. As a matter of fact, it was used as a compact type of snack that could be carried. It was energizing, it was filling, and it was also something that was used as a morale booster, certainly to troops who were stationed far away from home. Fun story, Benjamin Franklin was actually requisitioning supplies during the French and Indian War for General Braddock for the Pennsylvania Regiment. And one of the things he requisitioned were 6 pounds of chocolate for his officers to use with their men. It actually was a form of compensation for soldiers in the Revolutionary War.
Okay, we're going back to those chocolate dollars again. So if I have my homework right, though, didn't Mars Wrigley have a role in developing rations for troops?
Yes, and you can see it right here. So in 1930, Forrest Mars Sr., son of the company's founder, Frank Mars, observed British soldiers during the Spanish Civil War eating little pieces of chocolate surrounded by a sugar shell. He brought the idea home with the intent of creating a similar confection that Americans would love.
I think I know where this is going. Tell us more.
Enjoy your snack. I'm sure you do, Patrick. He developed this button-shaped candy made of milk chocolate and a hard sugar shell. And I think you know the name of it.
M&Ms.
Excellent. That's right. So Mr. Mars, along with a person called Mr. Bruce Murray, he was a son of a former Hershey executive, produced these M&Ms. And so now you know how they're named after Mr. Mars and Mr. Murray. He made them exclusively for the US military rations in World War II, primarily because they fit compactly in this nice little tube you see here, go in the soldier's backpack. And because of the sugar shell, it was more resistant to warm temperatures, especially in places like North Africa or in the Pacific. They didn't melt quite as easily. But even after the war was over, service people still created demand for M&Ms. And Mars kept an alliance together with the American Red Cross, helping to provide M&Ms for servicemen and servicewomen after the war. And today, we still have an alliance with an organization called Operation Gratitude, a nonprofit organization providing boxes for service people across the world, as well as different volunteers, first offenders, first operators, for people across the globe. So we are, first responders. And this is a way that we get a way to help give back to our community.
So I think we're all familiar with the popularity of M&Ms. You mentioned there's medicinal piece of this. Can we go back and talk a little bit about health benefits?
Yeah, it's interesting too. So not only was chocolate a delicious drink and a portable travel food, but it was also believed to have many different health benefits. Do you know, historically, it was actually prescribed as a medicine to cure and prevent many different ailments. People believed in the healing properties of chocolate. Matter of fact, over in Europe, as well as in the colonies and in early American days, chocolate was sold in apothecary shops alongside medicines and healing balms. In Philadelphia, Benjamin Franklin actually listed the name of 24 different chocolate makers who advertised in his Philadelphia Gazette. He recommended it as a cure for smallpox in his 1761 edition of Poor Richard's Almanac. Hey, Patrick, can you imagine going to the doctor and the doctor says to you, hey, take 2 M&Ms and call me in the morning?
Absolutely. I'm on board as long as it was a refillable prescription. So that's an interesting piece of this. I don't think people really realize. I know we'll probably touch on that a little bit more during the founding of the country. It was also used on the medicinal side. But what about innovation? So you talked about the very manual process early on. There must have been key innovations along the way or inventions that has changed chocolate production.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, really the Industrial Revolution helped move chocolate from primarily a drink into the solid forms that we recognize and appreciate today. So in 1828, a Dutch chemist named Conrad van Houten developed a cocoa press, which actually pressed out the cocoa butter from the cocoa bean. This actually allowed chocolate makers to blend back the cocoa butter that they wanted with the cocoa solids. And that's exactly what Joseph Fry and Sons did in 1847. They're a chocolate maker, and they blended cocoa solids and cocoa butter and some sugar to make the first solid bar that could be eaten. However, it had a gritty texture, and it was actually produced what was called kind of a bad mouthfeel. And Patrick, don't you love it when you have a delicious piece of Dove chocolate like this, and you get that silky smooth bite, and it kind of just goes right down your throat? That's what people wanted, something like that. In 1876, Daniel Peter developed a recipe incorporating condensed milk along with cocoa powder, sugar, and cocoa butter, resulting in the very first milk chocolate bar. And it was an immediate success. And by the 1930s, it actually became the favorite type of chocolate that was consumed. More innovation in 1879, Swiss chocolate maker Rudolf Lindt developed a process for conching. Now that took care of some of that rough grittiness and by smoothing out the chocolate. And then by the 1890s, another Swiss chocolate maker, Jean Tobler, invented the process for tempering. Now, what tempering does is it puts that nice shine on your chocolate like you see here and the snap when you break it. Now, by the 1920s, eating chocolate had surpassed drinking chocolate in popularity. But what's unique about chocolate is that chocolate is versatile. You can drink it, you can eat it, you can even bake and cook with it.
We've covered a lot of history, and we're about to get ready for the Q&A section. I feel like you've got a few other fun facts for us, and I'd like to start to bring in our audience on this. So we're going to be using the chat function here. So we like to quiz them a little bit. So at this point, let's have you jump in. Let's see if we can quiz some folks a little bit.
Okay, so Patrick, I'll read the question. You're going to give the audience a few seconds to think about it, and you're going to help me with the answer, right?
Yes.
Excellent, good. Okay, which early American president was known to be a big 6'2" consumer of chocolate?
Okay, so this is for our audience in the chat box. Give me your guesses here. Let's see who gets it right. We're looking for an early president.
Early, Patrick.
Very early. Oh, there we go. George Washington.
Yes. Our first president was indeed 6'2", very big, but as well as a big chocolate enthusiast. In fact, he and his wife, Martha, often enjoyed a cup of chocolate for breakfast in the morning. Okay, question number 2. Can you name another early American president who was an ardent enthusiast of chocolate? He was also 6'2", and another clue, he died on July 4th, 1826.
That's a lot of clues there. I think we're gonna get there. We go. Jefferson.
Very good, yes. Thomas Jefferson was a big lover of chocolate. Actually, Jefferson wrote a letter to his friend John Adams in 1785, stating that he believed that the superiority of chocolate, both for health and nourishment, will soon give it preference over tea and coffee in America, which it has in Spain. Okay, our next question. Which 20th now, we're moving ahead, president consumed chocolate during a Brazilian jungle expedition?
Let's see what we come up with here. Any guesses from our audience? Chocolate in a Brazilian jungle. There we go. Theodore Roosevelt. I just spoke to him a few weeks ago. He did not bring up his chocolate fetishes, but tell us about this.
Well, in his book, President Roosevelt wrote in Through the Brazilian Wilderness that he listed the daily rations for 5 men, one of which was chocolate. And he said, sweet chocolate, 16 ounces each Wednesday. Okay.
Sounds good.
You can imagine him eating 16 ounces of chocolate, can't you?
For sure.
Okay. Which early American aviator drank a cup of chocolate during a trans-Pacific flight?
Oh, okay. Give folks a second here. Give us your chat here, your guesses via the chat.
This is bigger than our normal audience, isn't it, Patrick? So we have more people guessing, I hope.
We do. We do have a lot of guesses going on here. Amelia Earhart, yes.
Yes, very good. Yes. During her memorable flight in January of 1935, Amelia drank hot chocolate from a thermos, and after arriving, when arriving in the Bay Area from her flight from Hawaii, she sat for an interview and provided the following. She said, "That was a most interesting cup of chocolate I had over the Pacific Ocean, quite alone."
What about any other fun facts from modern history?
Well, what else do we have up there? Do we have another question, or are we going on to our next piece? Yes, famous moments in chocolate history. Okay, well, there are many actually, and Patrick, one of the things is chocolate was carried to the highest point on Earth in 1953.
Highest point on Earth, 1953. Let's see what the guesses are that come in. Any guesses of a very tall mountain? Mount Everest, first one in, yes.
Chocolate has also ventured to the deepest ocean.
The deepest part of the ocean.
In 1960.
Any guesses there? Got Everest coming in. I've got to let my Wi-Fi catch up to all the guesses. I don't know, we might have folks stumped here. Deepest part of the ocean. Chocolate has traveled. Mariana Trench?
Mariana Trench. That's
All right.
Exactly correct. So great guessing, people. That's not an easy one. So I'm glad someone was able to get that one too. So very good.
Well, we probably have the smartest audience you've ever been in front of if I had to guess. So, it'd be tough to stump this gang.
Well, I think they're doing great today.
Any other far off places that chocolate's gone?
Absolutely. Chocolate has also journeyed into outer space. M&Ms have gone into space via NASA's shuttle program. They were part of the shuttle mission since Columbia in 1981 and has become one of the favorite foods of astronauts.
Excellent. I think we've seen some video in the archives of astronauts chasing the M&Ms without gravity. It's always fun. Before we get to the Q&A from the audience, we've already got a pile of questions coming in, so I want to move quickly here. Tell us a little bit about Mars Wrigley's history and the role that they play in chocolate.
Yeah, well, Mars Wrigley has over 100 years of chocolate making history, creating some of the most iconic brands that we enjoy today. Three Musketeers, Milky Way, Snickers, Twix, Dove chocolate, and of course, M&M's chocolate candies.
And so I mentioned at the top, American Heritage. Can you talk to them a little bit about this brand? Folks are probably less familiar with that.
I'd love to do that. So Mars Wrigley is committed to education and the history, and American Heritage Chocolate was created in 2005 to help tell the historic history of chocolate to our consumers. American Heritage Chocolate was first produced as a drink, similar to the way chocolate was enjoyed back in the 18th century. But now we have actually expanded out. We have an array of products like you see right here, included a finely graded baking chocolate that can be used in all kinds of recipes that call for chocolate. And all products are based on recipes that are authentic from the 1750s. Now, one of the other things about it is when you enjoy American Heritage Chocolate, it'll be like nothing else you've ever enjoyed before, because it contains 8 different spices that I mentioned today, things like vanilla, orange peel, cinnamon, and chili.
So it's about as close as we can get to having the same kind of chocolate that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson had.
That's exactly right.
Okay. And I know you work with the archives and a lot of historic partners. Do you want to touch just briefly on that?
Yes. One of the things I usually do events just like this, of course, you know that, and I do them around the country. And I think that doing this virtually, by the way, like we're doing today, Patrick, is fantastic. So again, thank you for having me. 7 years ago, Mars created the Forrest E. Mars Jr. Chocolate History Research Grant to support the study of chocolate's rich history and its impact on past and present culture in the Americas. And we believe in preserving these stories and bringing them to life for present and future generations. Past winners included places like Fort Ticonderoga, Mount Vernon, the Old North Church, Betsy Ross House, and the New York Historical Society.
Great. Well, I know that you've been involved in Mars has produced some books on that. Do you want to do a quick show and tell of some of the books?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see, do you want to hold them up or do you want me to hold them up, Patrick?
You can hold that one up. I'll hold the other one up.
Yeah. We call this one the big book for this obvious reason right here. And actually, this tells you everything you would want to know about chocolate. It was actually produced by Mars with over 145 researchers involved and about 45 different authors in this book. And it was actually a collection of research that took place over several years by Mars to tell this fascinating story of chocolate. So if you want to know everything there is about chocolate, I would recommend this book. It's not quite that portable, but boy, I'll tell you what, it's hard to put down.
Okay, and I've got the great moments in chocolate history, a smidge smaller here and a little bit more accessible. And so do you want to just tell us just the 2 seconds on this one?
Yes, absolutely. So, we partnered with National Geographic back in 2015 to really highlight some of the great stories of chocolate's history. We designed a book with great visual pictures in it to help illustrate a lot of the different parts of chocolate history. And it actually has about 20 different recipes in the back for those of you who like to cook and bake with chocolate as well, too.
Great. And just so you know, I'll be mentioning this at the end, these both books are available at the Archives store. And then I know you've got an educational thing you all have produced as well, right?
Yeah. So this is actually an educator's guide, which we actually developed back in 2018, also in partnership with National Geographic, called Global Stories, where chocolate inspired discovery, innovation, and imagination. It's designed for students in the grades 4 through 8, and actually it teaches world history with what we call through the lens of chocolate. So you can learn a lot about global world history, and there's also different activities in here as well too, for students to learn and explore and learn a lot more about the world of chocolate.
And then there's a partnership with First Book, which I think is really relatively new, but I know very impactful.
Yeah, and one of the things we like to say about that is, in order to further our goal of education, we're in the 3rd year of this partnership we have with First Book. First Book is a nonprofit organization providing books, educational resources, and other essentials, including coats and snacks and hygiene kits to educators serving underserved children across North America, including Canada. And one of the things about chocolate is it has a timeless story, one that spans cultures, people, rituals, and experiences. If love makes the world go round, chocolate makes it just a little bit richer. Patrick,
Okay,
I can't tell you how much I appreciate having me here to tell this great story.
Of course. Well, I'm not letting you off the hook yet. I've got a pile of questions here. I'm gonna try and force you into the newscaster soundbite answer, so I can try and get through as many as possible while I snack on my M&Ms here. So let's start with the chocolate houses. Do you happen to know, are there chocolate houses still in use in the UK today?
There are actually places where you can go to visit. Now, I don't know what they serve there, but if you go to the UK, I do know that there are some that are still open and open for tourism as well, too. Love to go over there and see them sometime, but they are still there.
Okay. And when we say chocolate, does that always mean with sugar, like we think of it today?
Well, it's interesting because if you think about baker's chocolate, you're talking about chocolate with no sugar. So again, high cacao content in there too. So again, one of the things that I don't believe I mentioned, but it's important to think about is you can actually make chocolate without adding sugar. You could add things like honey or agave or other sweeteners that are natural to flavor chocolate and give it a little bit of sweetness. But once sugar came along, and again, sugar wasn't indigenous to the Western Hemisphere. We believe it came from India, planted in the Mediterranean and eventually wound up in the Caribbean. But once it thrived and started growing, people really developed that sweet tooth and started using it a lot in chocolate as well too. But in today's world, you can buy chocolates of all different levels of sweetness.
Okay, that's actually a good segue to this other question. When did chocolate start to add like sugar and sweetening versus the spices?
Well, again, once sugar came to the Caribbean, so 1500s is when it started moving over there and actually started moving up from the Mediterranean. That's when we believe it would have been added to chocolate as well as other foods as well too. So both in Europe as well as in America. But again, hard to trace it without people actually specifying how they used it.
Okay. And So how does one become a chocolate historian? And you've got to have some stories about, like, what do you love about your job?
Yeah.
By the way, you're
Well,
in great shape for having worked at Mars for 30 plus years.
Well, you know what? I love what I do, and I've worked for a fabulous company and Mars Wrigley, and I'm very thankful for it. And they've been more than gracious to me. I was actually a history major in college. I went to Gettysburg College and studied history, but I went into the world of sales and doing a bunch of different things because I wanted to work for a big company and learn a lot. But again, always have a passion for learning about history. And when the opportunity came to study about the history of chocolate, write about it and speak about it, I was so thankful that I was able to connect with the American Heritage Chocolate brand so I can do things like this. So again, you know what? I bet you if I asked your audience, most people out there have a chocolate story, and that's a great place to start. Tell your chocolate story.
Excellent. I think I have too many chocolate stories. Okay, changing gears a little bit. How did Belgium get to be such a chocolate center?
Yeah, Belgium gets a nod, so does Switzerland as well too. And again, it's just that Europeans generally consume more chocolate than we do here in the U.S. And we're way behind them on the average pound per person. But again, it's just the way they blend their chocolate. So again, chocolate is made primarily with the same ingredients. You can buy different types of cocoa beans. And as I mentioned, we grow cocoa around the globe. So again, different beans produced in different regions produce different flavors. So Belgium does get a good nod for high quality chocolate. And so do the Swiss as well too. But I mean, there's other people who will tell you that German chocolate is fantastic and other countries as well too.
Okay. Can you tour Mars Wrigley anywhere? See how the chocolate's made.
I wish I could tell you you could come into the M&M plant and see us make M&Ms. Unfortunately, it's not open to the general public. But one facility that we have, you can watch us make chocolate, is our ethylam manufacturing site out in Henderson, Nevada. You can go in there free of charge and watch them actually make some of the best confection you'll ever get a chance to try, including American Heritage chocolate.
Yeah, the ethylam is a favorite of mine. And in case folks didn't hear it, because it kind of broke up in my, it's Henderson, Nevada, outside of Las Vegas.
Yes.
It's the facility. Great. So here's a question. Where can we find the student guide you mentioned?
Yeah, thank you. I apologize for not mentioning that. Go to our website, AmericanHeritageChocolate.com. And you can pull this down free of charge. And again, please distribute it the way you would like to do that as well too. I know National Geographic on their website has many different educators' guides, but please go to AmericanHeritageChocolate.com, find it there, and please pull it down and print them, distribute them, however you'd like to do it.
Okay. And then I'll be talking a little bit more about this, but there's a general question about, can you get American Heritage at the grocery store? I know you all have a sort of a philosophy on that.
Yeah, well, American Heritage Chocolate was, again, the vision of Forrest Mars Jr. And one of the things that he felt very passionately about was supporting American and Canadian historic sites. And what he wanted to do was help sites tell the fabulous story of chocolate and drive the revenue back into the historic sites. So we are primarily distributed at different sites like the National Archives. And you go there, and again, it's a way that you can help support the sites where we're sold at. And we're sold at about 52 sites right now in the country. You can go to AmericanHeritageChocolate.com and locate a historic site that you can get chocolate from if you'd like to do that.
And if you don't want to go that far, you can go to the National Archives store.org and get your baking chocolate. We have the milk chocolate and the dark chocolate online. And you
have FLM chocolates there too.
We do. We're currently out of the FLM since the building is closed, but we do when the building is open, we do offer FLM as well. I have a couple pop culture. We'll do a couple more questions here. I'm just looking at the time, and then I'm going to close a couple pop culture questions for you. Does the soil and the climate change the flavor of chocolate?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. It sure does. So one of the things that I've talked to some of our scientists about too is, how does the soil, the climate, even the air quality, the air itself impact the plant? And it does. So again, cocoa beans that you might find out in Southeast Asia might have different flavor notes than you might find beans grown in Africa or even in the Caribbean, South America. So yes, it definitely does affect it.
Okay. And then folks would like to know, how is it that E.T. wasn't eating M&Ms?
I'm sorry, say it one more time.
How is it that E.T. in the movie was not eating M&Ms?
Oh, that's a painful question. Well, yeah, it was actually a decision made, and it was before my time. But again, unfortunately, Reese's Pieces got the nod on that one, and there's other opportunities, and so that was one that, it's just fun to watch him eat candy. So I'm glad at least E.T. got to eat candy.
There you go. I'm going to wrap up with this one, and then we have just a couple other things to let our guests, our audience know about. Is it true that chocolate makes you feel better during a pandemic?
You tell me, Patrick. Is it making you feel better?
That's absolutely. You mentioned the medicinal. I don't think you're prescribing this for any kind of medicine or therapy here, but I think it's fair to say it would make you feel better. What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's certain foods that, really are comfort foods, and they taste good. They're very satisfying. And there's things that you can really enjoy. And I truly believe that about candy. And it may not look like I eat candy, but I do eat candy almost every day, just a little bit, because I really enjoy it. It's delicious. It's fun. And again, makes you feel good. There are different chemical properties that people have kicked around about whether or not there's any chemicals that are stimulated by chocolate, and there's different theories about it. But again, I think mostly it's just something that makes you feel good and you enjoy it. So I ask you to eat it responsibly. It's a treat, and enjoy it.
Very good. That's fair. That sounds like a parental theme every Halloween to all kids around the kids learn the hard way usually about the volume they bring in. With that, I think we're going to wrap up. We're getting to almost the top of the hour. Dave, it's been awesome having you. We do have a couple of people asking how you're so thin, having worked at Mars for 30 years. I'm going to leave that on the side. So just take that as a compliment. And we're delighted to have you, obviously, as a partner and supporter of the Archives Foundation, but just a friend. We love having you in the building. You do demo from time to time. Dave and his team will come in and do demos of the chocolate, the American Heritage chocolate. We've even done it on the 4th of July outside. So we encourage our folks who are in the Washington area or visiting to always keep a lookout for those announcements, and look forward to seeing you hopefully in person soon, Dave, at some point.
As soon as I can. I'd love to be back, Patrick, and best of everything to you and your staff there. And again, your family and friends as well too. Thank you again for having me.
Great, Dave. Thanks so much. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate our donors and our members. And if you're new to the Archives Foundation, you too can be part of this very cool group: armchair historians, civically engaged citizens, general enthusiasts of history. We take them all. Visit our website, archivesfoundation.org. We mentioned our chocolate. If you want to go to our store, the National Archives nationalarchivesstore.org. We do have merchandise for you. We've got the chocolate. I mentioned the American Heritage chocolate. We've obviously got the books as well. But frankly, we've got the best store in Washington for a museum or a gift shop, and it's online and available to you now. So I hope you'll go check us out there. Stay tuned for some terrific programs coming up in August. We're looking forward to celebrating the next one up. I believe I'm going to be interviewing the director of the JFK Library, talking about that museum, a virtual tour of the Kennedy Library in Boston, and then talking about Kennedy's legacy. And then later in the month, we've got the anniversary of the 19th Amendment, women's right to vote. And we are going to have a ton of programs for you that week, celebrating in great style the centennial. So I hope you'll visit us at archivesfoundation.org/women to check out those programs and start to RSVP and grab your spot now so you don't miss anything. On behalf of the National Archives Foundation, I want to thank you for joining us today. Until our next program, I hope you'll be safe and be well.